Welcome back everyone. Time to go ahead and talk about another iPhone that came out many years ago, but we're just gonna go ahead and see if it's still worth it. Surprisingly, and this is something that's very crazy to me, this phone has a humongous crazy history in my opinion. It is still getting software support. This phone is pretty much turning 8 years old this year, and the fact that it's still kind of supported is pretty crazy to me for sure. So if you want to pick one of these up, I'll say if you want to, go for it, but I'm going to go ahead and leave some of my favorite iPhones of this year in the used market. I'll find them on Amazon, link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the front of the iPhone 5S, we have that pretty familiar 4-inch IPS panel, and I've said this before for a long time, even at this stage, Apple's panels were really good. I never really had a problem with them at this stage. I don't even have a problem with them at all. This panel is not bad when you consider the age of this phone. The only problem is that it is kind of small and I would like a bigger panel, but we've already, made a lot of improvements in that. So in this day and age, obviously it's a little bit too small, but for sure at the end of the day, the iPhone 5S's front panel really isn't too bad in my opinion. You have Touch ID on the front as well. This was the first iPhone to bring Touch ID, and I really hope Apple does bring Touch ID back because I think it's so needed nowadays more than ever. Now you have the front camera as well, which is really cool. On the bottom, you do have the lightning port and the headphone jack, which is really awesome. And on the back, you have the aluminum build to it. And I would just want to get this out of the way first. This iPhone still feels extremely premium. It doesn't feel cheap. And when you look at the way it is, this is one of my favorite designed iPhones. I think this is obviously better looking than the iPhone 5, but it just looks so good and it still feels extremely good. When you hold it in your hand, it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel old. It kind of looks a little bit dated for sure, but it doesn't look like a super old ugly phone. It just looks kind of older. Now you do have a little bit of glass on the top and bottom of the back of the iPhone 5S. So I think that's really cool. At the end of the day, the iPhone 5S looks so good that it's just not even fair. When you look at a lot of other phones from 2013, I think the only other one that's kind of in the same ballpark is probably like the Nexus 4. I don't know if that came out this year or the year before, but the iPhone 5S still looks really good for sure at the end of the day. Now on the back of the iPhone 5S, you do have that single camera setup, which we'll go ahead and hit on right now. It had that single 8 megapixel sensor. Now I don't think anybody's really expecting this phone to be extremely good anymore. Obviously we made, huge improvements in the camera sensors, but in all honesty, it's not that bad of a camera lens. Obviously it's not that great, but it's really not that bad. I still think it has, my thing is this, when you compare the iPhone 5S features in that camera to the features that we have nowadays, obviously the newer iPhones have a ton of more features, but the UIs look almost identical. You're just getting portrait mode and night mode and stuff like that on the newer phones, but it's not a humongous difference. Obviously the quality is much better, but I don't know, obviously with the 5S and then I look at the iPhone 12, the camera UIs are almost identical, which is so funny. So I don't know what they're trying to do there. Hopefully they do make some huge improvements to the UI, but I don't think the iPhone 5S's camera is that bad. You have 1080p at 30 frames, pretty typical stuff. I film all my videos on both my phone and these YouTube videos at 1080p at 30, so take it as you will, but I do think at the end of the day, the iPhone 5S for sure has a really good camera setup for sure for a 2013 phone. Obviously nowadays it's not that great when you compare it to today's phones, but at that time I think it was really good, and nowadays it's not really that bad. On the front you have a 1.2 megapixel sensor. You can do 720p videos at that, and again I don't think it's that bad of a camera setup on the front. When you compare it to today's phones, obviously this one is not good at all, but when you look at what this phone was and where it is now, I definitely do think there were a lot of improvements for sure. So in terms of the camera setup, the iPhone 5S I think is still surprisingly pretty good in the camera department. It's definitely not perfect by any means, but it's still pretty okay, and it'll probably get the job done for a lot of people for a 8-year-old phone almost. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up. Now software wise, as I said before, this is probably the biggest asset for the iPhone 5S. It's still getting software support. That in and of itself is a crazy statement because this thing came out in 2013. I don't know of a lot of devices that came out these many years ago that are still supported. I think laptops and stuff like those are the closest things to it. But a phone at this caliber that was still getting software support is insane to me. And that is this phone's biggest asset in my opinion. Now, it stopped getting software support at iOS 12, and I think that was actually a pretty decent version to end off at. But one thing I want to say is that, the software isn't the crazy thing about it. It's not like it's getting crazy features that the newest phones don't have or whatever. It's pretty outdated still with iOS 12, considering the fact we're on iOS 14, about to get iOS 15 in a couple months. But it's the fact that Apple is still engineering teams together to engineer the software. That's what's super crazy to me about it. And I think it's super crazy to a lot of other people out there too. So it still has the checkra jailbreak support as well. So you can jailbreak it on any software version, which that in and of itself is another really cool thing about this phone too. So in my opinion, the software is one of its biggest assets. Even though a lot of people probably won't care about it anymore, it's still a huge thing for sure. So in terms of the software, that pretty much covers it up. Now performance wise, this thing does have the Apple A7 chip inside of it, a dual core CPU with 1 GB of RAM. And I think the performance segment is another area which is really, really interesting, because for an 8-year-old phone almost, it's not a bad performing phone, and it's not a slow performing phone. It's a slow performing phone for today's standards, but it's not like a bad phone just in general, because when this phone first came out, maybe it wasn't as fast as the competition, maybe it was kind of close, but nowadays, when I look at the smoothness factor of this phone, for it being as old as it is, it's just insane to me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to sit here and just compare, like if I'm comparing the iPhone 5S to the iPhone 12, the iPhone 5S is going to be extremely slow. Like, it's not going to be able to do everything as fast as I want it to be and everything. But for the most part, I would say I could probably use it and probably be okay with it. Like, I would probably complain here and there, but the performance is as expected as it should be. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not expecting really that much from this device, and I would say it definitely goes above and beyond of what I'm expecting, because I'm barely expecting this thing to turn on at this point. But the fact that it still performs pretty well and pretty smooth, I think that in and of itself is a cool thing. But let alone that, there are a lot of jailbreak tweaks that you can actually download and install that make the phone feel that much faster, and you can get the gesture-based design with that jailbreak as well. So it's not really a necessity, but it definitely makes the phone feel that much smoother, which is another really cool thing about this phone. So I'll definitely tell you, in the performance standpoint, it's really not that fast, but it's really not that bad in my opinion. So in terms of the performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this phone has a 1,560 mAh battery. Now, I will tell you, at the end of the day, the battery life probably isn't that great. iOS 12 really wasn't that bad of a version to end off at. But what I will tell you though is that the replaceability and repairability of this phone is so high, you can repair pretty much everything about this phone, that it just makes it like if the battery has a problem, you can just go and just, put a new battery inside of it pretty fairly easily if you know how to unscrew things and put things back together. There's a bunch of battery cases available for this phone as well. So I'll probably tell you, at the end of the day, obviously it's not going to have that great battery life, but it's really not that bad if you know how to use it, if you know how to replace it. So in terms of the battery life, that pretty much covers it up. And to kind of sum up this video and say, answer the question, is the iPhone 5S still worth it in 2021? Well, this is pretty much what I'll tell you. If you have any way to actually go ahead and spend a little bit more money, I'll say by all means, go get the iPhone 10 or go get an iPhone 10. Go get any iPhone besides this one. This is like the oldest supported iPhone right now, and it really doesn't make any sense to have it. I've hyped it up so much in this video, and rightfully so, because it deserves all the credit. But I will tell you, there's a lot of other phones out there. This one is not the perfect phone. I don't think this is like a good value per dollar. I think an iPhone 8 is a good value per dollar. I think an iPhone 10 is a very good value per dollar. So I would recommend getting those type of phones. But if you currently already own the iPhone 5S, I would love to hear your experience with it, because in my head, if you already have an iPhone 5S, there's no harm in keeping it any longer. You know what I mean? You're just kind of waiting. I'm not too sure what you're waiting out for, but if you're trying to wait out for the perfect time to buy the next iPhone, it's never going to happen. There's never a perfect time, but there is a good enough time, and there's a good enough phone for everybody out there. So if you have an iPhone 5S, you still have a couple of assets. You still have software support for the time being. I think the best thing about this phone is the software, both in the support cycle. You're already at the end of it, but the checkra jailbreak as well, because you can be on any software version of the iPhone 5S, the highest to the lowest, and jailbreak that specific version. So that's a huge asset for this type of phone. So you can go ahead and install those tweaks and capabilities and all that crazy stuff that you couldn't necessarily do on an iPhone 12 Pro on the latest software. So take it as you will, but that's kind of how I would sum up this specific phone and how it holds up in 2021. Like I said, if you want to pick up any of the iPhones that I've recommended in this video, or that I would recommend in general, links will be down in the description. You can get them from Amazon, and I'll support the channel at the same time. But that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much for you guys to hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.